So, in my game on Wednesday, I had a really good situation. I had a really good adventure, a really good session. And I think the value of that session really showed how building a situation, setting things up, having the material you need, and then letting the situation evolve during the game really worked out. So this particular situation was called the Infiltration of Red Eagle Tower. And I'm going to link to my actual game notes for it, just so you can kind of see what the general situation was. These are all following the 8 steps from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. If you want to see me prepping steps like this, I have a whole series of videos and podcasts where I prep my game every week, so you can dive in and see that specifically. But now we're going to look at like what it was like after. So the whole situation, as we set it up, was that the Queen's sister, who was under house arrest for a conspiracy to dethrone her sister, had been kidnapped by a group of rogues known as the Red Veils. The Red Veils is like a new group of assassins that have shown up in the City of Arches. And the characters found out that the Red Veil had infiltrated her villa, the villa where she was being kept, kidnapped her and took her down to a ruined tower known as Red Eagle Tower down in the lower reaches of the City of Arches. The characters had made their way in, so at the point in the adventure, the characters had made their way in through a cave at the base, the rocky base of the tower, which had a troll named Black Talons, or Black Fingers, Black Talons, Black Claw, something like that, and fought this troll on their way in. But that got to the first point of the situation that I think is really valuable, which I'll talk about, which was having multiple paths for the characters to go into the place was something that was really valuable for that. So the situation really began when they were they went through this natural tunnel underneath the tower, broke through a wall, and found themselves in the cellar beneath the tower. And I ended the previous session with a guard coming down the steps. So a couple of different things with the way the situation was set up that I think really helped is there were actually multiple factions of villains inside this tower that were working loosely together. There were the Red Veils, who were the top of the tier. They're the assassins. They're really good. They were really powerful. And then we have 2 other groups known as Hell's Scimitars and the Devil's Miscreants. And they were 2 like low-level gangs that the Red Veils had hired in order to do guard duty and other things like that. And there was about a couple dozen of them. I think we had about 24 Hell's Scimitars and Devil's Miscreants agents. One of the things that this did is by having these different groups is it meant there were different factions operating inside. The Hell's Scimitars might not like the Devil's Miscreants might not like Hell's Scimitars, Red Veils might not trust either of them. There was already like interesting complications that could exist with these different groups. And I didn't even really think about that too hard, but it ended up playing out very much during the scenario itself. I also had some key NPCs that were going to be there. We had Star. Star is an assassin who is actually the head of the Red Veils. I used a Forge of Foes monster stat block line for her. You can see it here in the notes. Made her a challenge rating 8. The characters, I think, are level 8. So the characters are level 8, so I made her a challenge 8. She probably could have been actually a little bit harder than that. But it didn't matter because I never actually faced her. We had Krissa the Whisper, who is the second in command of the Red Veils and is the one who's actually in charge of the operation that's going on here to capture the Queen's sister. And then I had 2 ogres who never showed up, Theric and Gavish, which were gladiator ogres and bodyguards of Star. So that was kind of what I had prepped. Then I had monster stat blocks for the Hell's Scimitars and Devil's Miscreants, and I had 2 different levels of them, foot soldiers and cutthroats. I actually think I never used the cutthroats. We were tougher. I ended up just sticking with the foot soldiers, the CR 1/2 foot soldiers, because it meant that they could drop relatively quickly. I set up, as I do, all of my secrets. One of the advantages of the secrets here is that they could learn information about what was going on in the tower as they went. They could learn it from talking to people. They could overhear people having conversations. They could just pick things up with insight checks and investigations to kind of pick things up. So there's lots of different things that they could learn about what was happening in the tower. So that was pretty much the setup that I had. I also had a map of this. So I had a map. Again, I just grabbed a Dyson map. I actually grabbed a couple of Dyson maps for a couple of different things. But one of them was Red Eagle Tower is the name of the map that Dyson Logos has. And I used this map for my game. And what I did is I printed it out, and then I took a pen and I drew some stuff on there, and I annotated it by hand. And some of the annotations I had were mostly like what's where. So I said, like, there's a guard perch, there's a dining hall where the guards eat, there's like a room where the guards kind of sleep and rest, there's a main courtyard area where guards are kind of on patrol, there's a whole bunch of different parapets where the guards are kind of keeping watch, and then there's the actual cell where a Atrida is. I added a cellar. So I added a cellar that actually goes below the ground level that really just had a natural tunnel that led into it, and they broke through the wall to get into the cellar. So one thing right up front that I did that I think worked really well is I accepted the fact that there were going to be multiple entrances. So here's a real tip that I want to offer, which is, not only do you offer multiple ways in. So the idea is like, well, the tower is open at the top. Maybe they could drop in and fly. Maybe they could pretend to be somebody else. Maybe they could go in disguise. Maybe they could try to infiltrate it by climbing over the parapets. Or maybe they could go in below. One of the things that I almost always do is I have like another secret entrance that's below the place, a secret tunnel that exists beneath whatever the location is, that you could fill with all kinds of monsters. You could have black puddings, or you could have other kinds of, non-sentient monsters that lurk down below. Old crypts with undead lurking around in them. So you can build kind of a lower level of whatever location you have, and the players can decide if they want to go into it. What I've generally found is whenever I add that kind of path, almost like a secret path that they learn about. Yeah, you could go up to the front door and kick it in and start fighting people. Yeah, you could sneak in and go over the parapets. Yeah, you can fly in from above and try to do it. But the minute you add like a secret entrance that says like, oh, but there's also like a waterway that leads out through a cave below, almost always the characters say, ooh, we're going to go that way. So not only, whenever you add that secret path, you're not railroading them because they can always choose one of the other ones. But I will tell you that I bet you 2 out of 3 times they're going to end up picking that secret passage that exists underneath the tower as the way to infiltrate the tower. And that doesn't mean it's any less challenging. It's actually kind of easier for you because you can put like normal dungeony sort of fights in it when they choose that. So one of the things you'll notice here is I don't actually say, oh, here are where all of the bandits are. Instead, at the top, you can see where I wrote 24 hired bandits, 8 red-veiled bruisers and assassins. And I drew a little line that says, some are hell scimitars, some are devils miscreants. I didn't fill it out any more than that. I never, not until I was running the game did I decide how many of them were in any given place. And sometimes I would roll a die. I just rolled, like I said, 2d6 guards will be in the dining hall, and I rolled and it was 3, right? I rolled a 1 and a 2, and so there's only 3. And I'm like, that sounds right. It's a little light in the dining hall right now. So what was interesting is how they approached it and what they ended up doing. So I mentioned that the characters all made their way through the secret tunnel. Again, they're 8th level, so they have a lot of stuff going on, right? They have a lot of capabilities, a lot of things that they can do. And I think we had 6 players, so we had a good number of players. So they went in through the lower area, and they saw somebody coming down the stairs. A bunch of them hid behind stuff, while I think, did somebody disguise themselves then? I think somebody claimed to be one of the other groups. Oh, we're devil's miscreants down here. We were actually bringing up food for somebody else. And he was like, I don't remember anybody else coming down here. And so there were some conversations and stuff like that. And I think they ended up not convincing him, and they grabbed him and knocked him out and then threw him down the cave and then built the wall up on the cave. Then one of the characters, I think, went invisible and snuck up to see what was going on and saw that there were 2 other guards in the room right above. This is at that ground level, the ground level part of the map. And they looked around to see if there were 2 other guards, and they saw them, and the bard did disguise self to look like the guy who went down. And then went up and said, hey, I need some more help bringing some of this stuff down. And the other 2 guards were like, oh, and then they came down like, wait, who the hell are all you? There was a little bit of conversation, and then they bonked, and I think they ended up killing a couple of those guys. And then they said, and now they switched to be a different one. So at this point, the wizard says, I'm going to go invisible, goes invisible, and goes, they don't know where she is, right? They know they're here to get Atrida. Atrida is the queen's sister, but they don't know where she is. So they're trying to do recon without alerting the whole base, the whole tower, to find Atrida before anything else. So they think she's way up at the top of the tower. Turns out she's not, but they went way up top of the tower. So they go all the way up the tower, 4 stories up. They see that there's guards who are looking at a tower, usually 2 guards per level that are looking around, walking around, making sure nobody's infiltrating from any other angle. They get all the way to the top and they saw that there were 2 red veils in the red veil meeting room that are talking to each other. And they're describing the fact that the boss lady, the woman who's running this whole thing, is down there with Atrida, convincing her of Star's plan, that she can be the next queen. All she has to do is bend the knee to Star, and she can be the next queen. So now the players learn some secrets by overhearing the discussions going on between 2 members of the Red Veil. I think, so this is where zany shenanigans started to happen. So the character, whose name is Andrew Armageddon, he's a wizard, he went over, put his hand on, there was a red veil woman and a red veil dwarf man, like an elven woman and a dwarf man, puts his hand on the elf woman, the red veil assassin, and dimension doors all the way back to the basement again. So he breaks out of invisibility, grabs her, and teleports. And the dwarf sees it, and he's like, "What the hell?" Right? So then she's now in the basement with all of them, and they go and attack her. And she's actually really tough. She's a red veil assassin. She's no pushover. And she, hits him a few times, but I mean, it was 6-on-1. So she goes down. Now, what I didn't do is say like, "Oh, I'm going to add a bunch of new monsters." And like, was this battle a challenge or not? I didn't worry about any of that. I knew that one creature is not going to be very effective against a whole group of characters, but it didn't matter. It was really cool. And that's the way the situation went. But then the other part of the situation is now the dwarf is like, what is going on? So he goes outside first because he's not sure where they teleported to. He doesn't know where they went, right? He knows like somebody just grabbed and teleported, and I don't know who it was, and I don't know where they went. So he goes running outside to the guards. I rolled dice to see like every time, this is where you use like an oracle die. Is he going to go out or is he going to go down? Well, let's find out. And we rolled, and I said he went outside. So I made a little countdown clock, like a Blades in the Dark style countdown clock on like how soon it was going to be before he alerted all the guards or found them or whatever. And I started off by saying, like, it's going to be about 4 rounds. How many rounds is it going to be before he makes his way down? Filled in my clock. He went outside, didn't see anybody. Starts going down and says, somebody just grabbed them up. And I think the bard turned into her and told him. So he comes running down the stairs. So I got to go back. So she runs up. The bard runs up looking like her, tells the guards that are in the dining hall, these are members of the Devil's Miscreants, and says, there's something going on outside, head outside. And because they listen to her, they immediately do what she says. Like, they don't even ask why, they just go outside. So now they're gone. Then the dwarf comes down and she says, we've been betrayed. The Devil's Miscreants are trying to steal her, and they attacked, and they're right out there. And he looks at her, and he looks at the door, and he kicks open the door and starts killing the other guards. And they're like, they close the door and move away, and they're like, well, that situation's solved, right? We just got a red-veiled assassin with a pair of axes who's going and indiscriminately killing Devil's Miscreants because he believes they were betrayed. So then the rest of the group is like, okay, like things are definitely going on now. They learned that Star is coming, right? They found out that Star is going to be here any minute, and that they're going to give Atrida over to Star. So like, we got to move. So they go down the stairs, and now they see another red-veiled mercenary with a bunch of hell scimitars. And they say, the Devil's Miscreants betrayed us, and so-and-so is out there killing them. And the hell scimitars are like, we never could trust those jackasses. We hated those guys. We know that was, we knew they were wrong the minute we saw them. And so now there's a war going on between these gangs. And then when they go, now they've switched to look like the dwarf. The bard switched to look like the dwarf, told the other red veil, by the way, I think those hell scimitars are also going against them. I think we're being betrayed 2 different ways. And they're like, really? And I had them roll checks and stuff like that, because the red veils are pretty clean. And they're like, yeah. And so now all the gangs are fighting each other. So then they were like, well, we still have to get Atrida, right? We still got to go find her. They found her, and they saw that she was behind a big locked door. They know that I forgot where it was, what her name was. They know that Krissa the Whisper, who is the leader of the Red Veils here, is in with her. So they go and knock on the door, or they get the Red Veil guards to knock on the door. She comes out. She's like, what? And they said, what did they say? Like, oh, everything is going to hell in a handbasket. All of the gangs are going, we need to get her out of here right now. And we have a passageway down in the cellar to get her out. And Chrissa's like, looks around. She's like, okay, we'll meet Star outside of the tower, but we'll use you whatever they said, like, we've been infiltrated by evildoers, and they all got in through the basement, so we need to go to the basement. So Chrissa the Whisperer and the two remaining red-veiled mercenaries, or red-veiled assassins, grab the sister, who's like, unhand me, like, get your hands off of me, right? Like, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And they drag her all the way through and get her down in the basement. And when they get to the basement, she's like, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? And that's when the characters attack. So then they had 3 assassins versus 6 characters. The characters still had a pretty straightforward time. It was not a very difficult fight for them to fight the 3, because they had separated everybody out. Battles are still going above. They kill them. I think they killed, what did they do? Oh, they killed 2 of the 3 assassins. And the third looked like she was going to run. And they said, we're going to let her run. Or the bard who was still shapeshifted, or a lot of things happen. The bard who was still looking like one of the red-veiled assassins said, go, let's get out. We got to go tell Star what's going on. And she said, sure, I'm going to go do that. And she ran out the door. She ran out the cave entrance. And then the bard then created an illusion that made it look like the cave collapsed, killing the sister. Right? It made the sister look like she got crushed underneath rocks. So then the one escaped red-veiled assassin now believes that the sister was killed in a collapse of the tunnel behind her. And that's what she tells Star. The characters, meanwhile, wait until she's gone. They wait a little bit. They hear the commotion up above, and they're like, okay, now let's go, and we'll take her with us. And they take her with them. They leave, and as they go, they see Star, the leader of the Red Veils, riding in on a wyvern with 2 ogre guards that are running along on the ground, heading towards the keep. And they're like, well, whatever. Like, our goal is not fighting them. Our goal is getting her back to safety, and we've got her to safety. And at which point they started talking to her about, like, well, what does she want, right? And the whole question was, which side is she on? Like, and she, they had heard, hey, the Red Veils were trying to convince you that you could be queen. They would assassinate the current queen and put you in as queen. And they're trying to figure out, like, is that what she wants? So there was a fair bit of a conversation with her about what she wants. And my big thought about she doesn't want to go back to her keep. She's been there for like 12 years. She wants to leave. And she's like, and I don't think I want to be queen either. I was 18 years old when that whole conspiracy happened. I didn't even know what was going on. I know people were killed. My mother was assassinated during that. I didn't have anything to do with it, but it didn't matter because I was part of this Golden Dawn conspiracy, and I was arrested and given life in a keep. And everybody's like, well, it's this beautiful villa. What do you care? But being stuck in the same beautiful villa, never able to leave again, it's still a cell is still a cell. So she's like, what I'd really like to do is just leave the city. And that left a lot of complications for the characters. I'm like, well, who do they tell? The person who gave them the quest wanted her returned, and they had to like figure out from their NPCs what they want. 2 different NPCs that the characters work with. One of them wants her dead because she sees her as a risk to the throne. As long as she's alive, people are going to try to get her on the throne, and the life of the actual queen is going to be at risk. And that's the spy mistress, the spy master, Rosalind Zesh, is like, look, I would have killed her long ago, except the queen doesn't want her dead. And then the other person is the head of the Golden Knights, and named Halfcloak. And she said, Bianca Halfcloak, I think is her name. No, something like that. And she just wants her arrested and put back in the tower, right? She wants her arrested and put back in her villa. So then the players have to decide, well, what are we going to do? And that took some careful navigation of like making sure the players are good with things and making sure that along with the characters, because that's a situation where you don't want somebody to feel like they got betrayed or that they were betraying somebody else or something like that. So we had to be very careful with it. And that hasn't been fully figured out yet. We're going to figure that out at the beginning of our next session. But talking to one of the players about what their thoughts are, I think it's going to go in a direction that's going to be really fun. So that's kind of an example of like, you can think about how it played out during the game. And one thing that clued me in on the idea that this might be an interesting thing to talk about on the show is that one of the players said, well, I think we just wrecked all of Mike's encounters. And I looked at it and I'm like, well, that's my trick. I don't have any encounters, right? Like all I've got are these little bowls with little things in them and descriptions of stuff. And I decide where they go based on what the situation is. So you didn't ruin anything. We created an awesome story. I had no idea that's how it was going to play out. The players loved it. They were never really challenged in a combat perspective, but lots of challenge of like how to do what they were doing and what decisions to make. And they made some really smart choices. And it played out really well. And I think that's what made it really fun. And that idea of like, this is how the lazy DM 8 steps is supposed to work, right? This is an example of exactly how a situation works, which is I know the characters, I know where it's going to start. Like I had the strong start of the character, Benkar Hellgazer, one of the Devil's Miscreants, is coming down the stairs. So there's a thing that's happening right now that they have to deal with, right? I knew generally the scenes. You can see what my scenes look like. Deal with Benkar, infiltrate the tower, rescue the Queen Sister, and face the Red Veil and escape. Now, all those happened, but that's as much as I had about what kind of plot was going to occur. I had a bunch of secrets of things they could learn while they were there. They learned a lot of different ways. I had some notable NPCs listed, so I'd remember names. I did some Forge of Foes stats, so I had some stats that I could use pretty easily. I had, monsters was basically just other members of the and Devil's Miscreants, and even then I didn't use these cutthroats. Like I never actually used them. Now treasure, I had some treasure and some really cool treasure, and there was never really an opportunity for them to get treasure, so they never really got anything from this. Now, maybe they could be rewarded this from quest NPCs, but probably I'm just going to kick this stuff forward and they're going to find it in another treasure hoard some other time. So that is going to be pretty interesting. But I thought that this situation was a really good example of how all of these steps play out during a game to build a situation that is highly dynamic, where zany things are occurring that the players didn't plan on, that they didn't expect, but the choices they're making are having direct impact. I never kind of like pushed back and said like, no, you can't convince him to do that. He'd never do that. It was like, no, that sounds really fun. So yes, the fact that there are like 6 Devil's Miscreants out on the parapets who were told to be there, and then another Red Veil guy comes out and starts killing him with an axe, that sounds really fun to me. So we're going to go with it. So I hope that gives you an idea of like the style that I talk about and the way that the steps from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master work and how they can actually relate to a crazy dynamic situation with lots of zany stuff going on that the players really enjoyed. I really enjoyed, and it was really, really fun. So thank you for that. I hope that was useful.